Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Mank. What Mank is essentially about is basically we center on the real life of Herman Mankiewicz, who of course went on to write Citizen Kane, and we do follow him, writing that film, but we also follow the man that he was, how he was frequently manipulated by Hollywood, and also just the man that he really could have ended up being. So, Mank overall, I was very excited for this film. I mean, even before the pandemic was a thing, I've talked about this before, this was one of my most anticipated films for the entire year. Knowing that David Fincher was back alone was enough a reason to get excited, but then centering it around the writer of one of the best films of all time in Citizen Kane, I mean, how can I not be excited for that? I was very excited to see what he was going to do because I don't really know a ton about Mank as a person, so I was excited to dive deeper into that, but also just to have David Fincher back again. I was very excited to see how this film was going to turn out. A lot of people were thinking this was going to be like the big film that was going to sweep all the awards and things like that, and it's finally come out, and I will say this, Mank is not as good as I was hoping it could be, but it's still a really damn good film. There's a lot of things that I really do enjoy about Mank. This is a very different kind of biopic, but it's one that I think is still very effective and is very enjoyable, and I would recommend overall. But we're just getting right now, starting off with and I mean, predictably, that's one of the best things about this film. David Fincher always knows what to do in terms of a cast of actors. He always does a great job with casting, and that is really no different here. Everyone, I think, gives a really incredible performance, but let's first talk about Gary Oldman, who, look, Gary Oldman's an actor that he is one of the most, Gary Oldman's one of those actors that for a long time people were hoping that he'd get that big role, and then he finally did win an Oscar in Darkest Hour. A lot of people don't think that that was deserving, but if he were to win an award for Mank, I think it would be far more deserving because he is absolutely phenomenal in this film. He really transforms into Mank, someone that is very hardened, but he also is someone that is just very energetic and really has a lot of he's someone that's very energetic, he's very likable, but he also is someone that has a lot of insecurities. There's a lot of flaws and a lot of things that he's done, and I think Oldman taps into that very well, especially in the back half of this film. He really taps into just how hurt Mank was as a person, and I thought that Oldman did a really good job with that. I think Mank is someone that you really like following throughout this movie, and it really is because of Oldman's performance. I think he really goes all out here, and I was very impressed by what he ended up doing. Definitely one of the best performances of the year. He has this monologue, especially in the third act of the film, and it's amongst some of the best scenes I've seen all year, and it mainly was due to just Oldman's delivery. He's so good as this character. There's never a point where you see Oldman in this role. It feels like, Mank the entire time, and I thought that he just did such a great job with that. Excellent performance from him overall. However, the other big standout, and someone that I think really blew me away in this film, is Amanda Seyfried, who plays Marion Davies, and easily gives her best performance yet. Not just because of the fact that she has a lot to work with, or it's a really meaty role. This is truly a transformative performance for Seyfried. And yes, it is for Oldman, but even more so for her, because even with Oldman, like, you can tell the general mannerisms are in there, but if I didn't know that Amanda Seyfried was playing Marion Davies, I wouldn't realize that it's her, because she is just really encapsulates everything about this character, from the look to the physicality to even the way that she speaks in the film. I mean, it's unlike anything we've seen her done, and it's absolutely incredible. Every single scene that she's on, she just completely steals the show. I loved what she ended up doing in this film. I thought that she was just such a consistent standout throughout, and definitely one of my favorite things about this movie. I really loved her performance throughout this entire film, and the interactions between her and Gary Oldman. These two have a really good on-screen chemistry with each other. They work very well together. They have some of the best scenes in the entire film. It's just the banter between the two. I really did like their interactions here, and I thought she overall just did a really great job here. I was very impressed by her performance, and a lot of people have said after watching this film that she could very well be the front runner for Best Supporting Actress, and I definitely would not be against that, because I think it absolutely is deserving here. I really do think this is probably the best she's ever been. Now, the rest of the cast here also gives some really great performances. Lily Collins is really good, I think, as the character of Rita Alexander. I was very impressed by her in the film. Tom Pelphrey really blew me away. I have never really seen him quite this good before, but I thought he gave a really great performance in this film. I think he just... I know a lot of people are raving about him in Ozark, and I've heard amazing things about him in that, but here I think he just... The only thing I've seen him in prior, really, was Iron Fist, and I was not a fan of him on that at all. I thought he was very boring here, but here I think he's able to take his more... sort of muted delivery and really use it to his advantage, and I really like what he ended up doing in this film. You know, he plays the brother of Mank, and he does it very well, and I really did like his performance in this film for sure. Tuppence Middleton is very good as Herman's wife. I thought she did a really good job. Tom Burke is such a standout. He's not in the movie very much as Orson Welles, but whenever he comes on, I mean, he just captures everything perfectly. You would honestly think that that was Orson Welles on screen, because he just has everything down pat, and I loved his performance in this film. Definitely one of my favorites. And Charles Dance as well is amazing here, because he very easily, as William Randolph Hearst, he very easily could be very smarmy and very over the top, but no, this feels like a real person, because he was a real person, obviously, and I think Dance did a really good job at playing someone that is very entitled, and someone who acts very spoiled, but doesn't become too hammy with the role. He knew how to dial it down, and I really did like that about his character here. This is someone that's very much in a position of power, and Dance obviously is no stranger to a role like that, and he absolutely kills it here. Just the entire cast, I think everyone does a really great job. I don't really think there's a weak link in terms of casting here. But now let's get into the directing and the writing here, because I still think the directing is really good here from David Fincher. Something he's always done a great job in is putting so much effort and so much passion into things, but also really, I think in this film, does a good job of making this film stand out from his others. You know, we're used to like really dark and complex like crime thrillers from him, but then every so often we'll get something like, say, The Social Network, and similar to how The Social Network felt differently directed from his other films, that's the same with Mank here. He really goes all out in trying to make this as close to old Hollywood as possible, and I think he did a really good job with that. You can tell he did a lot of research. He put a lot of effort into this project. He's referred to this as his passion project for a long time. He's had this in development for a long time now, since the 90s, and just the fact he was able to finally make it, you can just see how gratifying of an experience that is for him, and I think his directing is really good here for sure. I think he does a really good job of knowing when to keep things fun, but also not being afraid to explore the darkness that we're used to from him, and I think he does a really good job with that. It's definitely not nearly as dark as some of his other films. In fact, there are a lot of more lighthearted moments, but he still keeps things relatively dark, and I enjoyed that about his directing overall. I think definitely Fincher's directing, he still remains one of the best out there, and it's just because of how meticulously directed I think the film is in trying to create old Hollywood, and he does a really great job with that. But going back to the writing here, that's another thing that definitely really sticks out to me about this film. I think the screenplay here is really great for sure. The one thing especially that the one thing that I think you need to know going into this film is that it's not really about the Citizen Kane aspect of it all. That's very much more of a backdrop in this film. The film is much more about other things that Mank was doing, you know, the kind of person that he could have become. You know, the film will get into how he was seen as this aspiring writer at one point, and how he was someone that was invited to a lot of parties, and even though he made like basically just like sci-fi schlock, people saw a lot of potential in him. And then contrasting that now with him making Citizen Kane, arguably his most daring project yet, and really his most like sophisticated work, and you see the way people act towards him now, it's really well done because it gives us a look at how Mank could have been and the person that he wished that he was, and the lack of respect that he really received from everyone. And I think the film does a really good job with getting into that overall, and I think that's one of the things that, like I said, I think is one of the best things about this film for sure, is just the contrast between those two things. But again, Mank as a character is someone that is very flawed. He's frequently gambling, he's drinking a lot, he has a lot of casual affairs, as his wife calls it. They're platonic affairs, like he doesn't sleep with any women, but he talks to a lot of women, especially when it comes to Marion Davies, and I think the film dives into that aspect pretty well too. But the other thing that really sticks out to me about Mank is that a lot of people are viewing this film as a love letter to Hollywood, and it very much is. You know, there's a lot of things in here that are very synonymous with the way all the Hollywood is done. The dialogue especially is pretty accurate to what you would see in a film made of that time. You know, that's something that they're really dedicated to do here, is that they really want you to feel like you are watching a film from that time period, aside from the fact that it's a little bit more like, you know, vulgar in terms of language and things like that. Aside from that, like, they really want this to feel as closely related to the time period as possible, and I think that Jack Fincher did a really good job with that. But the film also is very concerned with getting more into the dark side of Hollywood, how Hollywood is frequently influencing a lot of things, and comparing it to this election of sorts with Upton Sinclair, and how Mank kind of gets involved with that, and how similar to that election, he frequently feels like he is on the wrong side of things. You know, he feels like he's just kind of, nobody's really on his side in this film. You know, he constantly feels like there are bigger people and he's not one of them, and I think the film very well does dive into that. That's something that I was definitely very impressed with when it came to this film, and I think that's something that is going to surprise a lot of people, is that while Fincher clearly has a lot of respect for Hollywood, he also isn't afraid to expose that, yeah, some of what goes on in Hollywood is not right. There are a lot of people that are mistreated. Orson Welles, for example, was given complete creative freedom, and the way that he treats Mank as a character is just not the right way. It doesn't seem like this, you know, this should not have happened the way it did, but it did, and I think that's something that the film does a really good job with. The dialogue in this film as well also is just pitch perfect. I mean, there are just so many great quotes in this movie that I think you could definitely still use this film as a way to show just how good Fincher is at writing dialogue, and it sucks that Jack Fincher is no longer alive, because he really, I think, constructed a great screenplay here. It's great that he still used the work that his father created after all these years, and, you know, that's why it's such a deeply personal film for him, I think, and you can just see just how good his screenplay really was, and I think he did a really good job with that overall. And again, I think a lot of what the film focuses on is very good, but I'm just saying, if you're looking for a film that really dives into, like, oh, this is how this scene was put together in Citizen Kane, or this is how this came together, you might be a little disappointed, because that's not really what this film is interested in. It's much more focused in diving in on Mank's, like, personal life and other things that he went through, you know, behind the scenes of Citizen Kane, so you might be a little disappointed. Again, I still think that stuff is very effective, but I'm just saying, like, temper your expectations going in with that, because that's not exactly the kind of film you're watching here. Yeah, I think overall the screenplay is very good here. The cinematography in this film, though, is something that is going to stick out to a lot of people, because the film is in black and white, but it was in fact shot on film, and even though it was, though, don't let that dissuade you, because the film still wants you to believe that this is a film from the 1930s. From the fact that it's black and white, to the point where there are sometimes those like black circles that appear on screen. Even certain scene transitions, the way that that's done, I think they do a really good job with, and I just really love the cinematography in this film a lot. It's very lavish, it's very glossy, and it really sticks out amongst Fincher's other films. It's distinctly different, obviously, with the black and white filter, but also with the way that it's filmed, I just think was very impressive, and definitely one of my favorite parts of this film, I think, is the cinematography here. I really enjoyed the way this film was helmed a lot in terms of cinematography. The score as well by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. I mean, these two are some of the best composers working today. I've gushed about them a lot recently, and they continue to do so here. But what I was even more impressed by is that this sounds so distinctly different from their other stuff. They have more of a band now. They're trying to make it sound more like, again, something from the 30s or the 40s, and it really does work. I think the score is... It still has that sort of like synthy hypnotic feel to it, but it's more replaced in a more classic big band, loud feel, very, again, very upscale in terms of production, and I think that's something that they did a really good job with the score here. Sometimes it's very minimal, but sometimes it's also very bombastic, and I really liked their score a lot here. And again, just some of the best composers working today. I can't wait to see what they're going to do with Soul. I really can't, because I think their score here is simply one of the best of the year. I've been going back to it a lot since watching this film, and I think they did a really good job with that overall. The editing as well to this film, I think, is mostly really well done. There are definitely some points where the film does drag, but for the most part, I think it's paced very well. It's only a little over 2 hours, and you really don't feel it. I've watched this film 2 times, and I really don't feel it at all either time that I'm watching it. It really does fly by for me, and I think that's something they did a really good job with. Diving into the things, though, that do hurt Mank, because I will be honest, the first time I watched this film, I really loved it a lot. It was definitely a film that, was probably given my honorable mentions and things like that, and I was just really loving everything about it. And then rewatching it, I still really did like the film. I thought it was still really solid, but there were definitely some things that stuck out to me a little bit more in terms of flaws, and one of them being that although I think the nonlinear structure for this film was definitely the right approach and the way they needed to tell this story, I do think at points it feels a little bit disorienting, especially in the first 30 minutes. It's a little hard to tell what's going on. It's a little hard to tell where exactly we are in Herman's life, even though the film will tell us, like, what year we're in. What I mean is, like, characters will discuss something, and we don't really know what they're talking about. Like, for example, Mank's brother brings something up, and we don't really know what's going on there. So I don't think the film did a really good job with that. I think it needed to do a little bit better with just catching us up on where we are, because at points it just kind of feels like things are being discussed and we miss something, or like there's a piece of the film that's missing, and I don't think they did a great job with that. Also, I do think that the film misses an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into Mank as a character. I would have liked to see more of his family life, including his wife and children. His wife in this film very much comes off as a plot device. She's someone that's there to really represent just someone that's giving him a lot of chances and really just showing a lot of the flaws that he has, because he really is not a great husband to her at all, and I just felt like they didn't really dive deep into that enough. There's a scene with her at the end where they try to make up for it, and it just wasn't enough for me. I think they needed to do a little bit more there. All the other characters in this film as well just feel a little bit underserved. Not Marion Davies and not Joseph Mankiewicz, but virtually every other character I just needed more from. Orson Welles, for example, is very underused in this film, and I understand the focus is not Mank writing Citizen Kane. I do wish they did a little bit more with that. But I do think with the way the film ends, there needed to be a little bit more of a balance between the political side of things with Upton Sinclair, which I do think is necessary to the film. I've seen a lot of people very divided on that part. I do think that is central to what the film is trying to do, because again, it shows the divide between Mank and all these other Hollywood executives. I think it does that very well. But I think the film needed to put as much focus on that as it did on the relation between Wells and Mank, because the film puts a lot of focus on it in the third act, and I just wish there was a little bit more. Maybe it's because Burke is just so good as Wells that I needed more of him, but I just felt he was a little bit underused. Lily Collins as well, she's kind of like the audience in the sense, and they try to do something with her, and it just didn't really work. It run very hollow for me, and I needed more from her as a character, so I thought that did bring things down just a bit. And my only other flaw, I would say, is that I just think that some things in this film could have been chopped down. I think there are just some conversations that that go on a little bit too long, and I wish the film was a little bit tighter in that way. That being said, the last 30 minutes of this film, I think, are fucking amazing. The story that they end up telling when you realize where they're really going with things, it's really well done. The message of this film, and again, just showing how someone like Mank was kind of abused by a lot of the people that he worked with. They didn't give him the respect and the credit that he really does deserve. I think that aspect of the film is so well done, and they really tap into that very well, I think, in the film's final 30 minutes. Definitely some of the best parts of the film for sure, and I think a really good way to end things off. So I do think those things definitely do bring it down, but overall, it does not take away from the fact that Mank is still a really well put together film. It's very unconventional in its approach for sure, but it's got some amazing performances from Gary Oldman and Amanda Seyfried respectively. I think those two alone are enough of a reason to watch it. It does a really good job, I think, of making it look like old Hollywood as much as possible, while being a love letter, but also simultaneously kind of diving deep into the darker side of Hollywood, which I really did appreciate a lot. It's got an amazing score from Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. It tells a story that I really wasn't expecting, and I think the film does a really good job with that. It might not give you exactly what you want, but I still think at the end of the day, this is still a very interesting biopic. It's a film that I did overall really enjoy. I might not love it as much as I did on the first watch, but it's still a film that at the end of the day, I can say I very much did enjoy. Yes, it definitely is in the back catalog of Fincher's films, and I wish it was a little bit better considering how much of a passion project it was for him, but still, I very much did enjoy this film overall, and I am going to give Mank overall a B. This film is probably going to get a lot of awards buzz heading into Oscar season, and I think most of it is very much deserved for sure. I'm excited to see what it does end up winning and what it doesn't, because I think it definitely, a lot of people thought it was going to be the front runner for Best Picture, and I'm not entirely sure about that now, but if it did, I wouldn't necessarily be disappointed, because I do think it does deserve quite a few things, but we'll have to see how it does turn out. But overall, guys, in my review of Mank, let me know what you guys saw this movie. There's your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.